I'm not one for fighting, let alone buying war with people who clearly feed on control and emotional blackmail. But patience, my friends, is a finite resource. And when you have a woman, dressed as a suburban moral authority, climbing your fence every night, as if she were on a rural reality show, something needs to change. Let's start at the beginning. I live on a farm that has been in my family's name for more than 3 generations. It's not just any property. It's the kind of place with a soul, history, and the marks of time in every corner. The fence that surrounds the land was put up by my grandfather with wood that he treated himself. And that's exactly why each board there is more respectable than half the population living in the surrounding condominiums. The trouble started when they decided to build a housing estate nearby. You know, that kind of all-white neighborhood with silent cars, dogs with bow ties, and a community council that's more like a cult? Well then, the HOA was born there, like a tumor disguised as an organization. And of course, where there's an HOA, there's a woman with too much time on her hands and an inflated sense of importance. She first appeared smiling, that trained, square smile that doesn't go beyond the gums. She asked, with the greatest pretense in the world, if my fence was temporary or decorative. I thought it was a joke. I replied, still with some patience, that my fence was real, that it demarcated the property, and that this was a farm, not a soap opera set. The woman pretended to understand, but I saw in her eyes that this was going to turn into persecution. And it did. At first, it was just her walking nearby. Then she started to stop and stare, measuring with a tape measure, taking pictures. After a while, she started showing up during the day, with paperwork saying that some of the farm's boundaries were being re-evaluated by the committee. The detail? Her committee had no jurisdiction here. But to her, that was just a technicality. But the level of madness began to escalate. Suddenly, the fence was crossed. Literally. This woman started jumping over my fence at night, over and over again. I thought it was a hallucination in my tired head, until I saw the footprints, then the broken branches, and finally, the cameras caught it. She, with a flashlight attached to her head and rubber boots, walking around my property as if she were part of the neighborhood security circuit. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. I thought it was an animal. I got up with my shotgun in my hand, just in case. And who do I see? She's standing in the middle of my field, looking at a chicken coop as if she's deciding which chicken to process. I approached her and asked her what the hell she was doing. She replied that she was assessing the property's nocturnal activity, nighttime activity, on my land, uninvited. And she said it with the monotone of someone who truly believes that she is the modern incarnation of a sheriff agronomist. I had to take a deep breath. I counted to 100. He said that next time there would be no talking, that it was trespassing. And she, without blinking, said, "Don't worry, I'm just ensuring the well-being of the community." That's when I realized it wasn't just trespassing. It was debauchery. It was defiance. It was provocation. Because this woman wasn't worried about security, or the community, or anything. It was pure pleasure to invade and control. I could surround everything with barbed wire, and she'd find a way to get under it. I could put up a sign, and she'd laugh. I could build a wall, and she'd say it was blocking ecological ventilation. And as if the night theater wasn't enough, she started bringing in samples. She collected twigs, leaves, and a bit of soil. One day she had the audacity to knock on my gate with a Ziploc bag saying that she had found some kind of fungus on my plantation and that the committee was recommending immediate action. She thought she was on a NASA mission, but in practice she was just trying to annoy people who never gave a damn about her. After that, there was no way out. I couldn't sleep properly anymore. I'd wake up at dawn just to see if anyone was walking around the pasture. My dogs started barking at any sight. The chickens became agitated. And the worst, I was beginning to lose control of my own space. What had once been a refuge became a minefield of paranoia. That's when the idea came to me. Not a trap, not violence. Nothing that could put me in her place. I wanted something that was simply fair, simple, and that would give that woman the perfect experience of being in the wrong place, at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing. And all I needed was a pot of superglue. It took me exactly 2 nights to put it all together. Because if you're going to teach a lesson, do it with precision, style, and of course, a touch of irony. I'm not a vindictive person by nature, but this woman had exhausted all categories of human patience. And honestly, it wasn't about my fence anymore. It was about my sanity. Because you start out thinking she's just inconvenient, and the next thing you know, you're standing in the middle of the night, holding a flashlight and thinking about gluing a neighbor to her own fence. Yes, I did. And yes, I did. The area she used to invade was always the same. She seemed to have a nightly itinerary. She'd enter through the back, cross behind the chicken coop, take a walk around the vegetable garden, and then stand for a good 10 minutes by the barn, watching the cows as if they were planning a coup d'etat. I never understood it. Maybe it was just pure sadism. Or maybe she thought she was fulfilling some spiritual mission that only existed in her head. Well then, I took a specific board from the fence, the one she used as a support. I knew because she left a crooked footprint there, with a fleck of wool from her beige coat every time. I sanded the wood, cleaned it thoroughly with alcohol, and let the sun beat down on it for a whole day. When everything was dry, I took a bottle of industrial superglue, the kind that holds together truck parts, and applied a generous layer. Not a drop, not a stroke. It was almost a lasagna of glue, a sticky masterpiece. Then I covered it with a very thin layer of dust, just to disguise it. I knew it would come, because people like that don't stop. They don't understand signs. They don't respect boundaries. And, above all, they think they have the right to be where they don't belong. They are driven by a permanent sense of superiority. And this woman, in particular, had a pathological compulsion to try to command what she didn't have. That night, I went to bed early. I made coffee before I went to bed. I left the camera on, the motion sensor activated. It was no longer about security. It was about watching the moment. Because when you spend weeks being provoked, invaded, humiliated, discredited by someone who thinks the world is a condominium and you're just a rebellious tenant, you begin to long for the spectacle of poetic justice. 2:27 in the morning. The camera beeped. I got up without even thinking. I put on my slippers, opened the curtain, and there it was. Same route, same coat, same ridiculous flashlight strapped to her forehead, this time accompanied by a clipboard, because apparently the crime needed a formal note. I saw her approaching the fence, with that way of someone who thinks she's invisible. She climbed the board, one foot, then the other, and then she stood, stopped, frozen. You know that moment when you realize that something has gone very wrong, but you still don't know exactly what it was? She tried to move her left foot. Nothing. She tried to take her hand off the top of the fence. It got worse. Despair began to rise through her body like smoke. First her shoulders slumped, then her eyes went wide. And then came that desperate sound of someone trying to keep their dignity while realizing they've become a museum piece. I swear it took me a while to leave. I watched for a few minutes. The scene was almost theatrical. The woman, half squatting, half hanging, trapped by her hand and ankle, muttering profanities that didn't even match her nude lipstick and model neighborhood committee president face. She tried to free herself with a dry tug, but it only spread more glue on her trouser leg. With each movement, she stuck herself tighter. I finally went over there. I brought a bucket of hot water, which wouldn't help at all, but at least showed that I wasn't a complete monster. When she saw me, her face was a mixture of relief, shame, hatred, and something that looked like fear. Maybe it was fear of losing control, fear of looking ridiculous, fear of finally having crossed the line of someone who doesn't bow their head. She didn't shout. She didn't swear. She just stood there, trying to pull herself together. She asked me for help, as if she were doing me a favor by allowing me to help. I just said, This is private property. Again? And you've been warned." She was silent for a few seconds. Then she tried to argue. She said she was there for an unofficial external inspection, as if that justified the fact that she was stuck to my fence like a fairground sign. I didn't reply. I went to get some cooking oil and a spatula. It took me another half an hour to get it off without tearing a piece. When she finally managed to get out, she was a mixture of glue, mud, and defeat. She tried to walk away with a pose, but you could see in her walk that her pride had long since slipped down her dignity hole. He didn't apologize. He just said, "It won't stay like this." And I just thought, I hope not. Let's hope there are more to come. Because if she thought sticking it to the fence was the worst that could happen, little did she know what was yet to come. I thought that after the superglue episode, the woman would learn. Or at least, I don't know, reflect. Go home, look in the mirror and think, maybe I overdid it. But no, this kind of creature has no pause for self-criticism. Her mind worked like a runaway ego train, always at high speed and with the brakes cut. If you fall, if you hurt yourself, if you stick to the fence with superglue, it doesn't matter. The priority will always be to maintain the pose of being in control. And that's exactly what she did. She turned up 2 days later, as if nothing had happened, walking down the street as if she hadn't left a piece of her jeans hanging from the wood of my paddock. And what's worse, with her head held high, with a cynical little smile, the kind that makes you want to throw a water hose on her just to see if she can drain off some of the arrogance. But she changed her strategy. I could tell straight away. Now she was more discreet. She started hanging around the front of my property at different times, like someone who wants nothing. She glanced around the corner and approached slowly. One day, she pretended to be walking her dog, a creature that looked like a cross between a cotton bud and a Tasmanian devil, and squatted down, according to her, to pick up the animal's waist, but, coincidentally, right next to the gate, with a camera attached to her cap. She started trying to turn the tables. She said she was being visually harassed by my property, that my fence represented a structural threat to the neighborhood, and most unbelievably, she filed a formal complaint with her committee claiming that I was an unstable figure, that I threatened the safety of the neighborhood, and that I used illegal booby traps to hurt members of the community. She didn't just distort the facts, she created her own script. In her mind, I was the villain in a soap opera that only she watched. People from the association came to find me. 2 pale figures who looked like they had never touched a sack of dirt in their lives. They tried that polite speech, full of terms like mutual respect and harmonious coexistence. I let them talk. Then I calmly asked if anyone there had read the penal code. I showed them the images, the records, the map of my property, the deed, and a photo of the woman glued to the fence. Silently, they collected the papers and left, but she wouldn't stop. Later that week, I found a flag stuck to my fence, an HOA flag. That was the last straw. The woman was literally trying to mark her territory with an official flag. It was like she was saying, "This is ours now." I laughed alone. It was no longer provocation. It was performative madness, a desperate attempt to prove that I had some power. I tore off the flag, made a nice roll, and used it to clean the paw of one of my dogs, which was covered in mud. Then I burned the end on the stove and threw it in the garbage can. On Saturday, I had confirmation that it wouldn't stop until someone intervened. I woke up to a strange noise in the chicken coop. I thought it was a bug. I went there, and what did I find? The chicken coop fence had been cut, and footsteps. The woman went into the hen house, probably during the night, and tried to reorganize the chickens. Who knows what went through her head? Perhaps she thought they were disorganized, living in an anarchic system. Maybe she wanted to hand out leaflets about the new egg-laying regulations. There's no telling. All I know is that one of the hens was so frightened that she hit her wing against the railing and dislocated it. I took it to the vet. My head was boiling all day. I had already dealt with all sorts of absurdities. Invasion, provocation, staging, and now sabotage. It was almost a case study in insanity, with traces of domestic dictatorship. But at that point, I was no longer angry. What I felt was tiredness. A tiredness that comes when you realize you're dealing with something that isn't just stupidity or arrogance. It's obsession, pure and raw. But I'm not one to back down. I spent the rest of the weekend reinforcing the perimeter. I installed more sensors. I changed the entry points. I put a special lock on the part of the fence she was using. And most importantly, I decided that if she wanted a confrontation, she would have it. But it would be in my own time, in my own way, with all my cards on the table. Because I might even look like a country bumpkin to her, a man of the woods, with a dog and dirty boots. But she forgot that, first and foremost, I owned my land. And the only thing I hate more than a broken fence is people who think they can rule where they don't even have the right to tread. After that weekend, there was no more time to ignore it. The woman had crossed all the lines. It was no longer just trespassing. Now it was vandalism, sabotage, and a pathetic attempt at territorial domination that would only make sense if she was playing yard warfare with her own imagination. The problem was that her imagination had become a weapon, and I was tired of being the target. On Monday morning, I went in person to the municipal office. I brought a stack of evidence so thick it was like a doctoral thesis on how to deal with suburban psychopaths. I showed pictures, videos, maps, reports, even the note from the vet who took care of the chicken. The counter clerk looked at everything in silence, without interrupting, and when she had finished, she took a deep breath and said, "She's done this before, but never before has someone brought in so much." It gave me a mixture of anger and relief. Anger at knowing I wasn't the first. Relief that someone was finally telling the truth about her. The restraining order came out 2 days later. Simple, direct, and clear. The woman was forbidden to come within 20 meters of my property. I took the copy to her house myself. I knocked on the door with the serenity of someone handing over a trophy. When she opened the door, she looked like a wronged saint. That "how dare you" look mixed with false theatrical indignation. I handed over the envelope without saying a word. I just stood there, waiting for her to open it. When she read it, you could see the collapse happening in real time. First surprise, then denial, then panic, and finally, anger. He tried to argue. She said it was a hoax, that I had manipulated the system, that the HOA had priority over any land in the area. I let her talk. When she finished, I looked her right in the eye and said, "You can try to fool everyone, but not here. This is mine." I turned my back and walked away with the lightness of someone who has finally seen a door close behind them. But, of course, nothing is so simple when it comes to someone whose mind is trapped in a parallel reality. Because even with the order, even with the documents, she still tried. The next day, I noticed fresh shoe prints near the fence. It wasn't a break-in, she didn't get inside, but she stood there, just a few centimeters from the line, as if the fence were a symbolic barrier that she was trying to defy with the force of her presence. Almost childish, almost pathetic. I started carrying a gun, not because I wanted to, but as a precaution. The kind of madness she carried didn't respect paper or protocol. Her sanity was as stable as a powder keg on a dry day. I didn't know what might come next, but I was prepared. And, ironically, it was exactly that preparation that brought everything to a close. On Friday night, at around 11, I heard a dry noise coming from the side of the field. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't wind. I took my flashlight and walked over, treading lightly. When I got close to the fence, I saw it. She was on the other side, standing still, with her eyes fixed, staring at me as if she was waiting for me. She didn't say a word, not a sound. She just stood there, with that empty look of someone who has lost the game but still wants you to play again. It gave me a strange shiver. For the first time, I realized that maybe she had broken down for good, not from shame, but of pride, of obsession, from being thwarted to the end and not having a chance to fight back. She turned her back and walked away, walking slowly, almost dragging her feet, And that was the last time I saw her. Days later, the house was put up for sale. The HOA went silent. No one spoke of her again. It was as if it had been erased from the history of the neighborhood, a haunting that had finally dropped its bone. Today, the fence is still there, in one piece, reinforced, but without glue, no watchful cameras, no activated sensors, just wood, nails, and peace. I went back to sleep in peace. I went back to walking around the grounds without worrying that someone was spying on me between the bushes. The chickens lay their eggs in peace. The dogs bark for barking's sake, and I can finally breathe without the weight of knowing that a woman obsessed with the imaginary power of the committee is plotting the next invasion. She's gone, and I stayed. Because at the end of the day, those who defend their land with conviction don't need to shout, or make up rules, or climb other people's fences. You just have to stand firm, and have a good bottle of superglue nearby. You just might. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave your like and comment below.